We are excited to wrap up our installation of the co-hosted program between Georgia Audubon and Wild Cumberland, where over the course of the fall, we have had the opportunity to share different experts from the coast of Georgia who are connecting us, whether you live in Georgia, in any part of Georgia or any part of the United States, with Cumberland Island, which is a really special barrier island on the coast of Georgia. We've heard from biologists who study sea turtles, biologists who study birds, and now we're going to be hearing from experts who actually center around water conservation and water health. And the reason why we wanted to end on this note is because while many of us may live geographically far away from the coast or from Cumberland Island or from the coastal plain, our livelihoods and our health and our resources are actually very much connected, and in particular through our water resources. So we want to make sure that we close out this series by making sure that our audiences and our constituents are aware of the ways in which we are actually connected to our coastal regions and find ways to be able to advocate for the health of the water resources, no matter where you are. So we're very excited to be able to offer that this evening. And before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that if you would like to use closed captions for this event, you can go ahead and click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And I'll be placing that instruction in the chat as well, just after we introduce our special guest. So again, if you would like to enable closed captions, you can press the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. My name is Karina Newsom. I am the Community Engagement Manager with Georgia Audubon. And Georgia Audubon is an organization dedicated to building places where birds and people thrive. And so as a result, we're very invested in talking about information and sharing information that allows people to do the same where they live, be aware of and connected with the natural resources where they are in a way that benefits people and birds, and collaborate with other organizations who are also dedicated to protecting our natural resources, such as Cumberland Island. And today we've got Jessica Howell-Edwards, who is co-hosting this event with us, who is from Wild Cumberland, and I will pass it over to her. She's been having a little bit of connectivity issues, but I'll pass it over to Jessica to share just a little bit about Wild Cumberland before we move into introducing our guests and passing the mic over to them. Jessica, if you can hear me, feel free to share a little bit about Wild Cumberland.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think I lost my video capacity, but I hope you can all hear me. I just want to thank you, Georgia Audubon, and our partners who are joining us tonight, because it's such an important topic, our watersheds and our interconnectivity. Most of you are probably familiar with Cumberland Island and its location, but it is on the southernmost portion of our coast in the state of Georgia, and it has almost 17 miles of undeveloped shoreline. So there is no vehicular bridge to the island. It requires boat access, and it's managed by the National Park Service. Our organization is sort of dedicated to the stewardship of Cumberland Island and specifically its wilderness. So without further ado, I would love for us to get into discussion about our watersheds and how ultimately our state's water flows all the way through to our coast. And with that, I will give it to Luke.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our special guest that we have this evening. And I'm actually going to start with Jenette Gayer, who is the Director of Environment Georgia, and coordinates policy development, research, outreach, and legislative advocacy. She's run successful campaigns to designate Georgia's first outstanding national resource water along the headwaters of the Cuyahoga River, expand parks along the Chattahoochee River and Jekyll Island State Park, and stop construction of 3 new coal-fired power plants in Georgia, which is huge, while also advocating for solar policies that have helped make Georgia one of the top 10 states for solar energy in the country, excuse me. She serves on the leadership team for the Georgia Water Coalition and on the board of the Georgia Solar Energy Association. Jenette lives in Atlanta, Georgia, where she enjoys training for triathlons and hiking and camping in Georgia's mountains. So Jenette, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And secondly, but certainly not least, we have Luke Roberson, who is the coordinator for community engagement and outreach for the Institute of Water and Health at Georgia Southern University. Luke earned a bachelor's degree in biology and graphic design at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, and a master's in environmental science and policy from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. Prior to his work at Georgia Southern, Luke served as a biologist with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources Monitoring and Non-Tidal Assessment Division, and most recently served as the Adopt a Wetlands Program Coordinator for Coastal Georgia with the University of Georgia Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started by passing the mic first to Luke to kick us off this evening. Luke, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Karina. Hopefully my internet will stay together tonight also, so cross my fingers. I'll go and share my screen and get started on here. Okay, so Karina mentioned that I'm the coordinator of engagement, of community engagement and outreach at the Institute of Water and Health at Georgia Southern University. I just started last Wednesday, so it's very, very new for me. So you may see my old stuff here from University of Georgia Marine Extension, Georgia Sea Grant, where I served as Adopt a Wetland Coordinator. But this presentation will give you a little bit of an overview about the Adopt a Wetland program and how it brings in community members to get more involved in their water quality. And this is also kind of known as like a sister program to Georgia Adopt a Stream, which is coordinated through Georgia EPD up in Atlanta, which I serve on the state board of that group. But this presentation will talk a little bit about this program and kind of the issues that we get involved with in coastal Georgia. There's a lot of water issues, as you might imagine, that we deal with, and they're changing a lot in the future. So we kind of are working towards sustainable and feasible solutions for our communities through programs like this, and these community-based participatory research programs like Adopt a Wetland and Adopt a Stream are really important to getting more community ownership of the issues that affect our residents on the coast. So the Adopt a Wetland program is made up of a lot of a diverse group across the coast of Georgia, and so you have teachers, students, community groups, researchers, and even small businesses want to know what's going on in the waterways around their neck of the woods. So they want to get involved and want to know how they can give back to the community. And water quality is something that affects everybody. So we get those people out and about to look at their streams, look at their rivers, look at their wetlands, and see what's happening out there. What's the water quality like in my neck of the woods? And our neck of the woods is pretty big on the coast here. We have a 100-mile coast of Georgia, and there's 5 coastal watersheds: the Savannah, Ogeechee, Altamaha, Satilla, and St. Mary's. I'm based here in Savannah, but I used to work for the Ogeechee Riverkeeper before I came on at UGA. So that's kind of my home watershed. I love it very, very much. It's near and dear to my heart. And each watershed down the coast has its own issues related to what's going on, like the population centers that are in those watersheds, the pollution issues that affect each watershed, and even like how flooding might affect those areas and how they've been built up over time. So each place is quite different. And in these 11 coastal counties, you have a lot of intersection between freshwater and saltwater, and urban-rural issues that happens a lot. And so communicating these issues back and forth can be quite difficult sometimes, but it's really quite kind of part of the gig when you're working down here on the coast. And just to give you a little close-up on the counties here that Georgia DNR talks about as coastal counties. And I'll also mention that there's a large economic range here of folks. Especially if you're going into Glenn County, onto St. Simons, and those islands. You can have Sea Island, just $1 million homes, these incredible mansions, and then you can see really underserved communities in downtown Brunswick. So there's really a lot of have-nots in a lot of different ways, and environmental justice issues that are very important here on the coast that often need like real attention. And I'm glad to see that they're getting that more and more often these days. So why do I work in these coastal watersheds, and why do I have like these this community-based participatory research programs out here. But because our coastal wetlands are so important for our coastal communities. They're buffers for storm surge. They're filters for pollutants. There's lots of research to show that one of the reasons why we don't have large algae blooms and things like that are because our intact wetlands are really good at filtering a lot of the nutrients that come down and sequestering a lot of the pollutants that come through, and as opposed to getting out into the open waters. They're a sponge for nutrients, and so a lot of the chlorophyll and things like that that you might see leading to these algae blooms. If you haven't heard about them, what often happens, you have a lot of nutrients that come down the rivers from a lot of agricultural installations upriver. You'll have nitrogen and phosphorus that are used as fertilizers will come down the rivers, come down to the coast, and they often they're just food coming down for a lot of different organisms like algae. And these certain harmful algae will actually just have a feeding frenzy for these nutrients. And as they have that, they grow and grow and grow and grow into these things we call algae blooms. You might have heard them big. We have really big ones in the Gulf Coast coming off of Mississippi, off the Mississippi River. Also, the Chesapeake Bay often has big ones as well. And after you have these big algae blooms of all these plants that are eating and eating and eating all these nutrients, they basically eat themselves out of house and home. So when they've run out of food, they start to die. And as they die, they're digested by these little microbes, these decomposers. Those decomposers, as part of that process of decomposing, suck oxygen out of the water. And when that oxygen is taken out of the water, then nothing can live there. Like there's no oxygen for fish, shellfish, oysters, grass, you name it. There's just no oxygen in the water, and it becomes what's called a dead zone. And these dead zones can be very big. One of the worst ones I remember being down in the Gulf of Mexico was about the size of Connecticut. So they can be really big and really destructive for a lot of organisms. So that's why we really need to make sure our wetlands are protected and in good shape to make sure they serve their functions as part of our environment here. Those wetlands also serve as a nursery for our fisheries, our shrimp, oysters, fish, redfish, and things like that. If you ever come down the coast and want to get some good food, it's all right here. So it's really, really important that we keep those wetlands intact. And being Audubon folks, the birding is fantastic out here on the marsh. And I'm sure Karina, her experiences down here in coastal Georgia will back that up, I'm sure. But the cultural identity of the coast is also really important here. There's a lot of communities that really would really kind of live and breathe by the coastal estuaries around here. The Gullah Geechee community has a really strong tie to the marshes here and in South Carolina. And that's part of their identity, and part of a lot of people who live down here, part of their identity too. So keeping those things intact as part of that culture is extremely important for the residents on the coast. So there's a lot of water quality issues here on the coast, and I was going to go over a few of them. I'm sure I could spend all day talking about all the water quality issues we have. Of course, sea level rise is a really big issue out here. This is maybe a little bit of a complicated graph, but it basically shows a gauge at Fort Pulaski, not too far from where I live, near Tybee Island, and you can see as this graph goes up, you're seeing tides getting higher and higher and higher with time, and you can see what the trends will be. Now, if the trend continues just linearly, you'll see that low line that'll maybe only the height of mean tide will go up that high, but it's looking like it might be that quadratic trend, higher and higher and higher, which could flood people out of their homes, really impact wildlife and a lot of the estuarine species here. So it can be a really big issue moving forward with a lot of the places, especially people's septic tanks and water infrastructure. The impacts of those are still being studied, and it's something I'll work on a lot at my new position here at the Institute of Water and Health. So saltwater intrusion, of course, we talked about that a little bit. Habitat loss from development. So there's a lot of people wanting to move to the coast. With all those people moving in, you've got a lot of houses going in, you have septic tanks, you have water usage, you have wells. There's a lot of things that get pushed out when people want to come in. So our friend the alligator here may lose out to developers who want to put their houses in places where that might be old wetland habitat. And a place that is really kind of an example of a lot of that is the Savannah National Wildlife Refuge, which is near us, just across the line, across the state line in South Carolina on the Savannah River. They have a lot of issues with saltwater intrusion coming up from the port up the Savannah River. It's normally a very freshwater habitat area, and we're seeing more and more of their lands get inundated by saltwater, and it's something they have dikes and levees for, but it's something that will probably impact a lot of their habitat of all their birds and alligators in the future. So it's something that we need to pay attention to. And non-point source pollution is also a big issue. If you don't know what non-point source pollution is, it's really kind of like, whereas point source pollution is like, you can see a pipe, like a leaking septic tank or a pipe, you can see there it is, I can point right at it. Whereas non-point source pollution is more like runoff of parking lots, pollution, hot, superheated water coming off hot parking lots during the summer, the nutrients and fertilizers and pesticides that come off the farm fields, where it's kind of like there's a lot of different sources coming out to it, and they all kind of come into these waterways. So something that's very important and the focus of the Adopt a Stream and Adopt a Wetland programs. So hold on one second, let my dog out. He was sleeping next to me, and now he's ready to move. Anyway, to sum up the Adopt a Wetland program here, that really goes in this acronym called ADOPT. So the 5 goals really are increasing public awareness about the water issues we talked about today, and collecting water quality data. So it's collecting like metrics like dissolved oxygen, pH for ocean acidification, which is another issue we have on the coast, and also temperature and salinity. Just like that saltwater intrusion, we're seeing a lot of places that used not to be salty are now getting saltier. So it's an issue that we are really keeping tabs here on the coast. And we're gathering observations. So not everything is metrics like that are numbered, like dissolved oxygen or temperature, things like that. A lot of these observations come from just people who are on a walk and happen to see something wrong in their watershed. Say if you happen to be on Jekyll Island, happen to see a giant container ship flip over next to your island, that would be an issue for your water quality. It was something that people would want to know about, because it really impacts the watersheds. So observations don't have to be necessarily just very scientific. They can just be somebody saying, something smells funny here, or something, the water looks different today. What's going on? Those kind of observations are really important and vital to programs like this that involve community science. And always wanted to make sure that we're encouraging partnerships, just like what we're doing today with Karina and Jessica and Jenette. These community-based participatory research and things like that don't work without the community. So you have to build those relationships and talk to different people, get their experiences, figure out what their issues are, how best to work them together, because that's really kind of the name of the game on a lot of these programs, and how work gets done. And you get better solutions when they're community-based and focused and led. And finally, we provide tools and training. So in my job as Adopt a Wetland coordinator, I made sure that all my volunteers were trained up and knew what they were talking about, had the tools at their disposal to make the measurements they wanted to do. And then they could also talk to other people about what they were doing and be knowledgeable about the subject. And a lot of this knowledge they had already in them. Like a lot of people who want to do this kind of stuff know about issues that they've had in the past with water. So they're not coming from a place where they really know absolutely nothing. lot of people are really interested and have a little bit of an idea of what they want to get into. And I just basically just provide them the tools and training that they need to make the next step and then become more of an ambassador for water quality in their neighborhood. And that's really most of it. And now, Karina, am I hitting the timing level now? I'm about there.
Yeah, a couple more minutes if you need it. Yeah.
Cool. So I've basically got it. So if I go into this, I'll start getting deeper into it. So that's kind of the basic gist of this program and kind of the water issues we have here. When it comes to, so I should just kind of sum it up and talk a little bit about what the Institute of Water and Health will do for this kind of stuff, and focus on the issues that we talked about here about water quality issues, but really they'll pertain more to how humans and water interact, and how like, you know, how can community managers, leaders, politicians, how can they have more equitable and sustainable solutions for water quality issues going forward. And so that's one of the really important things that should come out of the work we do together. So yeah, that's pretty much everything in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luke, for that information and for that context. And I did put a link in the chat for folks who are interested to learn more about the Adopt a Wetland program if you would like to connect. And continue to watch Luke, watch this space, because he's about to do some incredible work with Georgia Southern. So Luke, thank you so much for sharing that with us this evening. We are collecting questions. If you have questions for Luke or for Jenette after her presentation, go ahead and throw it in the Q&A and we'll answer all questions at the end of the presentation. So again, please feel free to use the Q&A function for any questions that you might have. So without further ado, I am going to invite Jenette to join us via video and audio to kind of end the second half of this presentation, to kind of give us tools in addition to learning about how we can actually measure and monitor our local water quality and the ways in which water upstream from a place impacts locations downstream. Jenette is going to provide us with information that allows us to be able to advocate for our local water resources. So Jenette, thank you so much for being with us. Jenette, you are on mute in case you are talking.
Oh, I can unmute myself. It says I cannot start my video though.
Oh, here we go. How about now?
I can.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Okay, and let me share my screen. Please hold. We go. How does that look?
All right, we can see it.
Okay. All right. So greetings, everyone, and thank you to Audubon for a really fascinating series of webinars about water and wild places in Georgia, and then for the opportunity to join y'all tonight. Karina, I think, laid it out pretty well. So I am, I guess, sharing another angle or another way that you can get engaged in protecting our waterways, which is advocacy and getting involved in creating smart policies for our water bodies. So I am the State Director of Environment Georgia. We're a statewide organization that works to protect Georgia's air, water, and green spaces. And primarily we do that through organizing and advocacy. So I'm a registered lobbyist. Spent a lot of time down at the state legislature when the legislature is in session, which is only January through April. And then we do a lot of work with cities around the state, working with them to enact policies and rules that will help to move us in the right direction. And the way that I structured my presentation today is I basically looked at what are some of the different types of pollution that are out there, and pulled examples of problems that the state of Georgia is facing, water pollution problems that the state of Georgia is facing that kind of fit into a lot of those categories. So hopefully this whole thing makes sense. And before I dive in, I want to also give a shout out to the Georgia Water Coalition. So Environment Georgia is part of the leadership team that that guides the Georgia Water Coalition. So the coalition is, I think, 260 organizations strong. Thank you, Georgia Audubon, for being part of that coalition. We work on issues all over the state, and the coalition helps to coordinate and pick a couple different priorities every year to really push. We also do 2 really cool reports. I'm going to be focused most on the Dirty Dozen report that we put out every single year that focuses on really bad things that are happening in Georgia's waterways. But we also put out something called the Clean 13, which looks at really good stories of things that are happening for Georgia's waterways. And I actually think Georgia Audubon got a Clean 13 recognition this year. So congratulations, Karina. So my website was on the earlier page, environmentgeorgia.org. Water Coalition is gawater.org. Definitely encourage folks to bookmark that page and check out the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 13. The Dirty Dozen for this year is actually coming out in just a couple of weeks. I thought I would start with a story, a clean water story. So this is the Cuyahoga River. If anyone is from Ohio, you can probably correct my pronunciation of the Cuyahoga. Sorry. But it is a famous river. Many folks probably have heard of it before because it caught on fire. In 1969, there was a spark from a train going over the river that landed on an oil slick in the river, and the Cuyahoga caught fire. The fire was so strong that the flames reached up to 5 stories tall, but it was a non-event in Cleveland. The next day's edition of the town's paper included 10 sentences about the fire, so not even front page news. And that's because the Cuyahoga had caught on fire dozens of times in the last century. And after the Cuyahoga caught on fire, there were rivers in Detroit and Chicago that also caught on fire. The good news is there was an article, Time magazine put together a series of articles about clean water or about water in America. And they described the Cuyahoga as a river that oozed rather than flowed. And so this fire, along with things like the Santa Barbara oil spill, some of those other fires I mentioned, really galvanized public support for doing something to protect our waterways. And folks probably know the first Earth Day happened in the 1970s. We actually created the EPA. In 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed. And then 2 years later, the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that, EPA and the enforcement that brings, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, combination of those laws and permits, et cetera, that come with those laws has helped to clean up the Cuyahoga. So this is the river, this was taken probably a couple of years ago, but you can see people are eager to boat on the Cuyahoga, swim, the river is no longer catching on fire. So the really good message, I think, is that smart policies like the Clean Water Act, like the Safe Drinking Water Act, can work. They can clean up our waterways. They can make a difference. Obviously, though, there is still a lot of work to be done. So this is a telling pie chart, I guess. It just really lays out the challenge that we still face. This is how many miles of rivers are considered impacted or impaired or are in good condition. And you can see over half of our streams in the country, and we have a lot of streams. I feel like this got stretched out a little bit, but you can see we've got a lot of streams. Over half of those are unfortunately impacted. So this is where I'm going to start kind of breaking down different sources of pollution, and let's talk about some of the things that are happening around the state in each of these categories. Luke did a great job, I think, of talking about point sources of pollution, non-point sources of pollution. I'm going to break it down in a similar way, but maybe kind of put a final point on some of these things. So you can see that agriculture, far and away, one of the biggest threats that our waterways face. I'll also note that there's a larger kind of source of sort of what we call unknowns out there. Some of that is that non-point source pollution that Luke is talking about that's really hard to capture. Some of it is things like acid rain, atmospheric deposition. So there are other sources out there, but in terms of like actually what we are capturing and tracking, this I think is a good flag of what are the, you know, big sources out there. So let's get into the weeds a little bit. So starting with agriculture, Luke, I think, did a great explanation of some of the challenges that we face with agriculture. So whether it's pesticides or other things that farmers are spreading on fields, or large, what we call CAFOs, combined feeding operations, which is, you know, large pens of chickens or pigs or cows, et cetera, that create a lot of waste, leak nitrogen fertilizer into our waterways. And that creates large fish kills. So this is an amazing visual, I think, of algal bloom in Ohio. Some of the fish kill you can see in the corner that resulted of that algal bloom. Luke did a great job of, I think, explaining this. Here in Georgia, we have chickens. So Georgia, I think, is one of the broiler capitals of the country. And so have a lot of chicken houses. But there are efforts at the Georgia legislature to make it even easier to bring some of these really large operations into the state. And this gives you some more information about legislation HB 545, which the good news is did not pass, but we anticipate new legislation to be introduced that is very similar. But it would have made it much harder for locals to bring nuisance suits. So one of the ways that we can stop some of these industries is, you know, if someone comes in with 10,000 hogs and builds a huge hog lagoon full of poop, right now in Georgia, the locals can complain and have the ability to shut it down. We see the Farm Bureau bringing laws that would change that and would make it easier to bring some of these operations into the state. So I think a really good reason, again, that law did not pass, but we anticipate new laws that will be very similar. So maybe a great reason to connect with Gordon Rogers, who's the director of the Flint River Keeper and has been sort of leading the charge on this, or to just go to that website, gawater.org. You can sign up for updates and the coalition will send you updates as legislation is introduced. Moving on, talking more about industrial water pollution. So this is the Elk River in West Virginia, where folks might remember 2014, this industrial facility spilled 10,000 gallons of a toxic chemical that is used to prepare coal for burning into the river. People were, I think, yeah, here we go, next slide. Over 300,000 people in the surrounding area were out of water for a week or more. Schools closed, restaurants closed, bars, businesses, hotels had to close. And it's estimated that it cost the area an estimated $61 million in lost revenue and wages. I'll add, so that's like a great example, not a great example, that's a terrible example of a clear disaster. So there was a pipe that burst. So that's one type of industrial problem that we see. Another type of industrial problem we see is just facilities that are actually permitted to pollute. So this next example that I have is in Georgia. The Altamaha River has been in the Dirty Dozen for many, many times, you can see here, because a plant on the Altamaha River continues to pollute. And the pollution that they're dumping is actually legal pollution. So they have a permit to release this pollution. But if you've ever been on the Altamaha River, in this section downstream basically of the plant, you can smell the outflow from that plant. And if you catch a fish downstream of the river, you'll also see the fish actually smells like the pollution that is being emitted by that facility. And then you can see here that what we've seen in years past is that facilities can actually change the rules to make it easier for them to continue to pollute. I included an industrial, so I have some, my sort of next category gets into sort of mining and fossil fuels, and the question of where does coal ash belong? Does it belong in sort of an industrial source, or is it a fossil fuel source? It's a little tricky. I think it could go either places, but I chose to put it in the slideshow here. So coal ash is a problem that I think we are going to be grappling with in Georgia for the next couple years. Coal ash is the toxic pollution that is left over when you burn coal. It's basically a sludge that is right now stored in pits around coal ash ponds. These pits have, in other places, not in Georgia, but in Tennessee, have been known to fail. So the dams holding the coal ash in have broken and taken out entire towns with this really highly toxic sludge. So it's really important that we figure out how a long-term storage for coal ash that actually protects our waterways and protects our communities. We have, you can see here, I'm just focusing on some of the coal ash ponds in the Chattahoochee River Basin. I've got another slide that digs into some of the other coal ash ponds around the state. We have roughly, I want to say 80 ponds all over the state, most of them close to old coal-fired power plants. Some of those coal-fired power plants are still running. All of those ponds are unlined and again, often sit right along the banks of rivers. So this is a problem. EPD, because of a rule that EPA passed, EPD is in the process of permitting Georgia Power for the closure of those ponds and pits. And in some cases, Georgia Power is actually drying out the coal ash and moving it to a line facility away from waterways. But that's not the case for all the ponds around the state. So on these next two slides, I really highlight some of the places where we know the coal ash will be sitting in pits that are not lined. So there's no sort of connection. There's nothing keeping the coal ash away from groundwater. The good news is it will be dried and capped. So we hope that that's a good step, but not enough. The reason I think the lining is so important is because we know that some of the toxins from coal ash are in fact leaching into groundwater. So Plant Share, which is in Monroe County, close to Macon, Georgia, residents, there's unfortunately and tragically a cancer cluster around the Plant Share, and a lot of testing of those different residents' wells has been done, and they found things like hexavalent chromium, which is, if you've ever watched Aaron Brockovich, is the chemical that is sort of the center of that story. They found other components, really nasty components that are found in coal ash in people's drinking water. So we know that the coal ash toxins are not actually staying in these unlined pits. They are moving through the system and into people's drinking water wells. One thing, so there's a couple different sort of what can you do on these slides. One is call on the Public Service Commission. Right now, we are all on the hook to the tune of several billions of dollars to help pay for this cleanup. And so great option is to call on the Public Service Commission and say, if we're going to be on the hook to clean this up, we should really only be on the hook if you're going to do it right. I hate to think about the price tag if Georgia Power goes, cleans up all these pits, doesn't line them, doesn't get them away from our waterways, and we all have to pay for them to do it a second time when they start to leak into our rivers. Another thing to keep an eye on is the Georgia State Legislature actually has a piece of legislation, I think it's HB 653, that would require monitoring around all of these long-term storage facilities for 50 years to make sure that there's nothing migrating away from the pits. That again will be in the legislature. Legislature starts in January. Great place to make sure that you can be kept in the loop is to go to that gawater.org website. You can also shoot me an email. I've got my email on the last slide. So coal ash, a big threat to our waterways, and one that is, going to be a lot of decisions are going to be made in the next couple of years about whether or not we do it right. Next is resource extraction. So, we are lucky, I guess, here in Georgia to not have a large coal deposit because you can see the tragedy that comes with mining for coal, especially if you are removing entire mountaintops to get to that coal. But we do have mines. Oh, that's a apologies. I guess the point that I'm just getting across with this map that is stretched out and looks a little funny is that even though we do not have coal to mine for in Georgia, we do have a lot of mining locations. And we know that mines, if they are done incorrectly, can cause serious pollution problems. In the case of Georgia, we are concerned about the problems that pollution and then even just the process of mining would have on the Okefenokee swamp. So for folks who have been to the Okefenokee, it is just one of the most beautiful places in our state. Right on the eastern border, I suppose, of the mine is a ridge that geologically helps to hold some of the water in the swamp and make sure it stays a swamp. There's a proposed titanium mine on that ridge. And right now, the mine is in the process of pursuing permits. So there's a great opportunity probably in the next couple months when we see a draft permit to weigh in on that draft permit and say, this is not something that the state of Georgia should be permitting. And then I've got two more. How am I doing on time? I'm doing okay. The penultimate source of pollution that I want to talk about is stormwater runoff. So as we develop, as we put down more concrete and more asphalt, we have more and more problems with stormwater. Georgia is a rapidly developing state. Luke was talking about all the people that are moving to the coast. That's probably true in a lot of parts of our state and is not always being done in a especially ecologically friendly way. So I couldn't find this is like the perfect example of bad development gone awry. I couldn't find the perfect example from the coast or the perfect picture, but I'm sure it's there. So you can see that we are slowly but surely encroaching on the wetlands and the marsh that are protecting the beach, and then also protecting, as Luke pointed out, in a lot of different ways, the waterways surrounding our coast. And what does that mean? So not only is there more pervious pavement that water is running off of into our waterways, but it also means that we are creating more sewage. And that sewage infrastructure is bound to fail. I love this picture. This is Mr. Floaty. So this is a tragic example. Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 2019. The city sewer pipes burst 6 times in more than 1 month, and did it again in 2020. And a total of 212 million gallons of raw sewage spilled onto the streets and waterways in a 2-month period. Unfortunately, Georgia Florida is not alone. So we have a lot of very old sewage infrastructure, old and insufficient sewage infrastructure in Georgia. This is a especially egregious one though, close to Lake Lanier. So, the drinking water source for a lot of Georgia. This is a sewage treatment plant that has had numerous violations. Oh, my 6-year-old is visiting me. Hi, buddy. Hi. I'm almost done, Flint. Okay. And it's causing terrible problems. Apologies, everyone. And then last, I wanted to talk about our drinking water infrastructure is obviously faulty. Probably the example that everyone has heard of in the past decade is the problem that happened in Flint, where roaded pipes leaked lead into the city's drinking water infrastructure and caused terrible problems. These are the corroded pipes. But you can see there's really no safe level of lead in drinking water, but the highest, so 0 parts per billion, the highest level of lead in drinking water in Flint topped out at 13,000 parts per billion. Environment Georgia and our national network look at lead pollution around the country. Georgia is not doing great. We don't have a standard for lead in drinking water. We don't actually regularly test for lead in drinking water, and we're certainly not investing in fixing old lead pipes or lead infrastructure. But there is good news. The Department of Education has a new program called Clean Water for Georgia's Kids that helps to test school taps for lead pollution. So encourage everyone on the call to get with your local schools or school district to encourage them to participate in this program. The program again is free. You just have to opt in. Last thing I'll say is that testing is just obviously part of the solution. We need to make sure that we are actually investing in solving problems that are found. And so big picture, we are advocating and working to make sure that the state is investing even more in the problem. And I'm done. Here's my contact information. I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go get somebody a snack.
Jenette, thank you so much. And hello to Jenette's 6-year-old. Thank you for joining us. Love to have the kids aware of the ways they can contribute to water health across the state of Georgia. Luke and Jenette, thank you so very much for your incredible contribution this evening. We learned so much about the ways in which not only are the impacts of water pollution and water health crises unequal, they're unequally born across the populations that live in Georgia, but they're also far reaching and have impacts beyond the places where we are geographically located. And so being able to see that so clearly illustrated between your presentations was incredible, along with tangible ways that we can address at the legislative level some of these issues that we're experiencing. And Jenette, I wanted to ask you first. So Carolyn Auger asked regarding House Bill 545, let us know how to fight is what she said. So if you have any feedback there.
It's tricky to answer because we don't have new legislation yet, and we probably won't until January. So I do think the best thing to do is feel free to either reach out to me again. I think, Karina, you were posting contact information in the chat. I will make sure you get on the list that gets the notification, or we can also just work with Georgia Audubon to pull y'all into that campaign and get the word out.
Absolutely, yes. And I'll be sharing an email after this event closes out to everyone who registered with all of the links to all of our websites and organizational contact information so that you can reach out to folks with questions. And if you would like to subscribe and kind of get the notifications, especially as it pertains to legislation that you can be involved with and respond to with your representatives. We had another question for Luke. Carolyn also asked, is there a link between algae blooms and red tide?
That's a really good question. Red tides normally don't happen too much in Georgia yet. I think I'm frozen.
Oh, I can hear you.
I'm frozen. There you go.
Yep,
Okay, good. I thought everybody else freeze like So yeah, it always happens afterwards. It says my internet connection is unstable. It's like, yeah, I get that already. I know that. Yeah, luckily red tides don't occur too much in Georgia. They're really bad in Florida and North Carolina. I've had them before, but it's a lot to go over. I want to put a link in the chat that I got from the Georgia Department of Health, and it has a lot of information there. That gives you like all the kind of FAQ of red tides. And I think the same person mentioned asked a question also about how our coast prevents algae blooms. Carolyn, yeah, Carolyn. So so the real intact wetlands do a really good job of filtering those things. There's actually been a study, I think it was in South Carolina, like the Congaree wetland out there. Said it works as well as I think like a multi-million-dollar filtration plant. Making sure those a lot of those nutrients get stuck there and get sequestered there as opposed to going on and becoming big algae blooms. So even though our wetlands are really good at filtering a lot of these nutrients out, I mean, they can only do so much. They're not invincible. So protecting them is really, really important. Make sure and also providing better protection upstream. As Jenette mentioned, we all live downstream, so you get started up there, and so the people downstream don't get harmed by the effects of what might be up there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Cynthia asked, what can individuals and families do to protect clean water? Of course, you both kind of mentioned some ways, whether it's engaging legislation and calling, or kind of participating in some of the community science efforts, but particularly folks who have like multi-generation households or people of different ages, is there a way in particular that you think is best for, especially families, to engage in the protection of clean water?
Sure. I mean, I'll start a little bit, and I'm sure Jenette has more to say about this too. I always think it's really good to get involved in a community. Being part of a community who go to cleanup is really a great way to meet people and do these kind of things. For instance, Tybee Island has a weekly cleanup every single, I think Sunday, and people go out and clean up there, and they've got a really dedicated group of volunteers. Joining a environmental group like Ogeechee River, in the River Keepers, 100 Miles, Audubon, these are fun that you're people, and it's really fun when you find those folks who share those same values. Then that gets you more involved, and then your combined power can really fight things that might be impacting your watershed, like these bills and pollutants that might be happening in your neighborhood. That knowledge and community strength can really move mountains in certain situations. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Luke. And a question for Jenette. So I think oftentimes people expect possibly more of our elected officials and our government when it comes to what they do to protect our water. But it turns out that our advocacy, of course, is incredibly important for making sure that the quality of our water where we are and across our state is actually up to the standard at which we would like to live. And so when people are engaging their elected officials, so for example, when they have the phone number to call to say that they want to see a certain reality, like what is the best way for people to engage in that kind of voice to voice, I guess you could say, interaction? Because I think a lot of people experience a level of intimidation when it comes to calling elected officials around issues, especially ones that are urgent and can impact quality of life. So what are your thoughts on like how to best engage with officials for these matters?
Here's what I'll say is usually when you call, you're calling their office and you're leaving a message. So don't be intimidated. So yeah, I phone calls are great. I also think, legislators sometimes can dismiss some of the form letters that we put together, although I think they are still valuable. But taking the time to write a personal letter and giving some personal examples of why you're taking the time to write an email, or even a snail mail letter if it's not an incredibly timely issue, is great. So if a phone call is a little above your comfort level, I think taking the time to draft an email or write a letter is also great. And then I also, there are plenty of times when those, form letters that you click on and send in like 5 seconds and then maybe forget you sent the next day are actually very, very valuable. So even though legislators complain about them, it is helpful to have them. So I think, do whatever level of, you feel comfortable doing, but do engage. And then, I think it's a really easy way to get involved. And state legislators don't get that much contact from their constituents. So it's pretty easy to make a big difference just by reaching out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenette. And with that, I'm going to start wrapping up this event. I would encourage you, I saw a lot of people were in the Atlanta area who are tuning in this evening. And if you are, please do connect with the Georgia Water Coalition to kind of get alerts around legislation that is on the floor, that is being thought about and talked about with our elected officials, so that you can voice your opinion, your concerns, because that is the way that our democracy is supposed to function and protect our health. I also want to encourage you to support and connect with, as Luke was saying, with local organizations that are dedicated to water quality and environmental health, such as West Atlanta Watershed Alliance and South River Watershed Alliance and other kind of community-centered efforts. I will be including their information in the follow-up email after this event as well. But on behalf of Georgia Audubon, I would love to thank you all for engaging with us this evening and thinking about the ways in which our connection with the natural world, for some of us it may be birds, for others it may be water or other parts of our natural resources, we're all connected to the health of these resources. And so I appreciate everyone engaging this evening, and I will pass it over to Jessica to close us out before we wrap up the webinar.
Thank you all so much. I think we all learned something new tonight. And I think that I'm especially grateful for the number of resources all of you provided for no matter where we are in our state to be able to take some sort of action. So thank you all for your commitment to conservation in our state.
Yes, and thank you to your families for letting us borrow you for an hour this evening. With that,
thank you for your patience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you all for coming, and look forward to seeing you via email with all the resources with which you can engage. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.